Thank you so much, Rajam Roose, for joining us today. Rajam is the CEO and founder of the San Diego Pain Summit, which is really becoming popular, Rajam. So I'd like to take a minute to talk to you about what your background is and how this came about.
Well, actually, I started out as I was a massage therapist, and I was in the massage therapy profession for 16 years. And I've always, been interested in helping people. And I was finding that the type of work I was doing was helping a lot of people with pain. And I didn't really necessarily go into it to relieve pain. I went into massage therapy because I've always been good with my hands and I've always been interested in the healing arts. So I figured it would be something I'd be good at. It'd be a great way to contribute to society. But over the years, I started attracting more and more clients who were coming in for pain reduction and finding their quality of life improved. And I've always been interested in learning and science. And I just started, it just kind of brought me along. And then I started looking into, I was introduced to books like The Sensitive Nervous System and Explain Pain by Mosley. Um, Learning that the brain, Norman Doidge's first book, The Brain That Changes Itself, kind of kicked me off on looking at more of how the brain and the nervous system function. So it's just kind of like this.
It's fascinating.
It's just this long journey of being introduced to books, getting into arguments with people who understood how to argue, who were able to show me how to look at research better, how to understand the basic. I don't really fully understand how to read a research paper, but how to understand, what you're looking at, what does the evidence actually show. So it's just kind of like this long
quality
journey. And then I started organizing continuing education classes. And in one of the classes, one of the students, the instructor during break was asking the students, who most of them were physical therapists, and a couple of them had recently graduated. And he said, aren't they teaching you guys anything about pain? Are you learning about Patrick Wall, anything with Mosley? And one of the students spoke up and said, yeah, we've learned that stuff, but we have no idea how to use it. And that's when I just had that huge light bulb moment. And I was like, all of a sudden, I knew exactly I wanted to have. I was like, holding a conference can't be much different than a workshop. Here's who I want to have. I need to get a big name to bring everyone in. And that's, so that's how that got started. And then I ended up closing the massage business because I didn't plan on doing massage indefinitely. And I wanted to spend more focus on the summit, because I see that has a greater impact on society than just serving my local community doing massage therapy.
I think that is excellent, because you can help your patient one-on-one, but to really affect change, you have to go broad. And the research and the science that comes forth is coming at such a speed to keep up with things and keep people informed. It's a challenge. So providing that service is amazing. I think too, looking at the curiosity of your mind to be fascinated by the science and the research and what it shows and find a way to help people with it. That's amazing. Kudos to you.
I have an engineering mind. So I come from a family of engineers and analytical. And so that's probably where that comes from.
It's that dangerous combination of an analytical mind with healing hands. Look out. That's awesome. And so what do you think are challenges on two sides? First of all, what do you think is the challenge for pain patients to get the help they need? And then what would be the challenge for providers to be able to have the tools to help those patients?
And that's a really good question. So my answer is just going to come from my perspective, because it really is, both of those are kind of a multi-layered issue. If you think of an onion, all these layers. And so my perspective comes from just a few of the layers. It's no way an answer to what I think needs to be done. But from what I'm seeing from my side, I always, since 2018, I've included the patient voice in the event and the patient perspective. And what I'm seeing from listening to patients is that the hardest thing is for practitioners to listen to them, and for them to find practitioners who understand anything about pain.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot to, to listen, to have that compassion. And it's not to say practitioners don't have compassion, but it can seem like they don't if they have this full workload and they don't have time, to work with the patients. But really just giving them that voice to say, your pain is real. I believe you,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's the biggest problem on the patient side that I see from my perspective. And then from the clinician side, the biggest problem is clinicians, when they go through education programs, they aren't given the tools or the knowledge to understand what we know so far about pain. I mean, we don't know everything there is. We know just a little,
Right, right.
but even just what we know, how can we use that, integrate that? I've heard that training programs here in the States have 20 hours for physicians. There's like 12 to
Wow.
20 hours on pain.
Wow, that's shocking.
They're not taught very much. And in fact, I've heard, and I don't know if it's here in the States or in Canada, it may be here in the States, but veterinarians have more training hours in pain
Oh,
than
that's crazy.
physicians do. And so a lot of it has to do with the training. And then also, from another perspective, it has to do with the health insurance and how that is lobbied. And,
Mm-hmm.
so it's just a lot.
It's a
It's very
lot.
complicated.
What's interesting is that there's this huge focus right now on the opioid epidemic. And so they're talking about we've been overprescribing opioids and we're seeing suicides and overdoses and things like that. And so now the pendulum is trying to swing to the other way and cutting people off of their medication, and people are panicking because there isn't really anything being offered to replace or to substitute. But the doctors feel their hands are like there's a real conundrum right now in healthcare as to how to help patients with pain. Um, so I don't know if you have comments on that or feel a certain way about that, but there's a gap. Clearly, there's a gap.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it stems from the fact that physicians aren't given a lot of education about what we know so far about pain, how to apply that into clinical practice. And so they were taught, give them opioids.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're seeing that that's not always the answer. It can help
Mm-hmm.
some people. Opioids are great for acute conditions, and some chronic conditions, they actually um, sensitize the nervous system further. So you just need
Right.
to continue using them. And that's not the same as addiction. It's
No,
just
no, no.
saying
Yeah.
that you continue to take them, but it's actually not allowing you to completely reduce that pain. It's just allowing you to work through it because of the sensitization of the nervous system. And that has nothing, I'm not even talking about addiction right there. That's
Right.
a whole other thing. And so instead of creating a system to give patients, putting a system in place, if you wanted to decrease the opioids or decrease it somewhat or all the way, they didn't put anything in place, and they just started taking the opioids away.
Right.
They're pulling physicians' licenses for
Mm-hmm.
prescribing them, so physicians are too scared to continue to prescribe
Mm-hmm.
them. People who were able to live their lives, they were able to care for their families, they were able to go to work with
Mm-hmm.
this medication, have that pulled. And so now they're turning to street drugs. They don't know anything about street drug. I mean, it's just a huge mess.
It's a huge
Those are my
mess.
thoughts.
Yeah, no, very passionate thoughts, very passionate thoughts, and I share them. And the thing is, recognizing that there's a problem and managing that problem are two completely different things. And to look at this issue and then to create something to be ready, to be prepared for how this is going to be managed, there was a knee-jerk reaction of, let's just cut. the medication. So patients are panicking, and it is a disaster. But one of the things that I like about your summit is it seems to have a very multidisciplinary, multimodal type of approach to pain. So what are some of the types of presentations you have that try to address some of these areas that you mentioned?
So, and I just want to, even though the event is multidisciplinary, it is when I invite the presenters or choose the presenters, I do think about the physical therapy profession and occupational therapy profession,
Yep.
only because they have a wide reach amongst, they have a wider referral system in
Yes.
place. And I have a lot of presentations about how to communicate with the patient, how to encourage and help the patient communicate about their pain and their situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really, I don't really go over techniques so much. Those happen sometimes during the pre-conference workshops. We may have some techniques, but the presentations are mostly on communication and learning to help the patient and discover, like, so when someone comes in to see you and they're in pain, often they don't necessarily, of course they want the pain to go away, but usually they come in and they say something like, I just want to be able to hold my grandchild, or I just want to be able to sweep the back porch when all the leaves cover it. So it's about, what does the patient want and how can we
Mm-hmm.
help them get there? And then also teaching them self-efficacy so that
Mm-hmm.
they don't have to rely on physical therapy or going into therapy as a crutch. They can learn
Mm-hmm.
how to manage their own pain and live with and manage their own pain. So those are the general types of things we have
Mm-hmm.
at the summit typically. And then I also include, I usually bring in 2 to 4 research scientists, and they talk about their latest research that has to do with pain, just to kind of keep the audience in the know of, like, wow, I didn't realize that was going on.
Right,
So I'll have some
right.
of that as well.
So if a provider comes to a patient with the idea that they have to cure their pain, the provider feels ineffectual. And it may be, just like you said, the patient isn't actually looking for that. They're looking to get their life back, to be able to manage their life and know how to cope with this situation. So communication on both sides, I agree that that's really important. And I feel sometimes that time constraints that a provider feels is what causes them to kind of cut the patient off or shut them down or try to distance themselves, and maybe it appears as a lack of compassion, but it's because the provider is in a business mindset in that moment of, I have patients waiting and I can't get too deep into this. And it's unfortunate, but it seems like what a patient needs is to be able to sit and tell their story, to be heard. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of time for that in a practical setting.
And that's
So,
where insurance, how we change how insurance is handled, needs to be adjusted, because
right.
if and you do have practitioners who are going to cash-based businesses, and there are some practitioners who, even though they accept insurance, they'll take that cut and they'll do, each patient gets a full hour and that sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah.
But the way that insurance, there needs to be lobbyists in there who are lobbying for this change,
Hmm.
and probably a lot of it has to do with money.
For sure.
So that's kind of out of my personal purview, but I see that that's a big block. Physicians aren't going to, and healthcare practitioners aren't going to have that time to sit with patients if they're being squeezed by the neck and they can't afford to keep their clinic open unless they see patients every 30 minutes and
Right.
can book for these certain things. So it's, rock in a hard place.
Yeah. Now, what do you feel about a psychosocial model of approach to pain?
Like the biopsychosocial model.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's basically, so right now that's like the current theory model that seems to work, even though it probably has some of its limitations too, but right now it seems to be working. And
Mm-hmm.
most of the presentations in the summit are, because it's basically addressing biology, the psychology, and the social aspects of, how what type of environment did you grow up in, what's your culture, all those things play a role in how our
Mm-hmm.
brains perceive pain.
Mm-hmm.
And the psycho is something that sometimes can turn off physical therapists because they're like, oh, I don't have training in psychology. But it doesn't, you don't have to have training in psychology to listen to your patient.
For sure.
So the things that I bring to the summit are all things that fall within the scope of practice, pretty much for anyone who attends, basically.
For anybody who interacts with patients.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that your summit is geared mostly to physical therapists,
An
but
occupational therapist.
and occupational therapists. But one of the things that I have always found fascinating was how much my knowledge grew and exponentially when I attended conferences other than my discipline. To see things from a whole different perspective and to get that appreciation for what is out there that's unique from what you can offer, so that as a provider you get to a certain point and you feel limited and your hands are tied, but this discipline here across the street opens up a whole new world of possibilities for that patient. I would still encourage all disciplines to go, and especially if you're saying that doctors get very limited training on pain, go to the disciplines who have more extensive training.
Mm-hmm. And
We're
when
not
I was a
gonna.
massage therapist, I had a lot of books that were geared to the physical therapy and occupational therapy,
Yeah,
profession.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'll say at the summit, it's about 35% massage therapists attend. And then I
Interesting.
get chiropractors, personal trainers show up,
Wow.
sometimes athletic trainers. I'll get one physician a year, maybe two. Occasionally there's psychologists that show up. So people are interested in this information. And I don't think it matters what profession
I
you're in.
don't either.
I'm just saying that when I'm choosing the presenters, I want to make sure the presenters can address that
Right.
profession, but any profession can take advantage. Nurses.
Yeah, it's interesting. This year is the year of the nurse, and they're talking a lot about self-care. Self-care, and it's funny, one of those things that everybody knows that massage and physical therapy is so helpful, but it tends that we don't really commit to it until we have a pain experience. And then we start experiencing pain and we think, okay, help me fix it, get me back to where I was before the pain started. Yeah,
And
so
sometimes that just won't happen.
sadly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And I,
sadly,
I had
but
I had a researcher come in 2016, Dr. Kevin Vowles, and he talked about how research shows that if when you start experiencing persistent pain, if you try and fight it to go back to how you were feeling before, it actually worsens your perception of pain rather than if
hmm,
you just try and work it into your life. And then people who have done that have reported that they still experience pain and limitations and have flare-ups, but it doesn't bother them as much as if they're trying to fight it. It was really interesting.
that is interesting. My background is in emergency nursing, and I found there are literally people out there who feel they should never experience pain.
I
And
think
when
that's a cultural problem. And
what is
like
that?
it's like something, I think maybe part of it is because we allow pharmaceutical commercials or something, but it's like, oh my God, pain is so bad. It's like, no, it's part of life. That's why
Yeah,
some cultures, like, in South America, people will just have back pain, but you never hear them talking about it. So it's easy to assume they
never.
don't experience pain, but they're just like, man, it's just part of life. Why complain about it?
And they modify their existence to minimize the pain. So if I have back pain, I'm not going to be lifting that heavy thing by myself that I might have done when I was younger. Now I'm going to stop and think before I do that because I have this awareness of the discomfort. But I think that's part of the issue that we face over here is people who truly believe they should never have pain, and if they do, they go straight to either an over-the-counter, and they escalate that trajectory with pain medication. So That's too bad.
Or
But
since I messed up my back a while back, I used to just go hiking up a mountain, not even think about it. Now I'm like, okay, what's the elevation gain? Let me check that first before I go up
but
there.
you still go hiking.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate
You
that I
didn't
can
take
still
to your
hike.
bed and just say, I can't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's, movement actually, that's one of the things I know I would hear from the orthopedic surgeons is that if we just moved more and kept everything limber, there would be fewer knee replacements, hip replacements, back pain. But the tendency is when you start to feel pain in those areas is you just shut down activity and,
Mm-hmm.
tell us when the dates are for your next conference.
The February summit is February 11th through the 16th of 2020. And the 11th through the 14th are workshops. So those are pre-conference workshops, and everything is so available a la carte. So I do get a lot of attendees who just attend one or two workshops.
Okay.
I get some attendees attend the full week. Some just attend the conference, which is on the 15th and 16th. So I don't want anyone to feel like they're hemmed into having to take something. So everything is just, a la carte, I guess.
Perfect. And you're almost sold out for that.
Yes.
Which is very exciting.
I'm
How
very
long have you been
excited.
holding these summits for?
This will be the 6th one. So
Excellent.
Since 2015 was the first one. And a lot of right now, they're being held in smaller venue sizes. So that's why there's, only very limited seating. Mm-hmm. And then hopefully it will grow into a larger size.
And you're expanding next year?
Yeah.
You're going to be doing 2. That's awesome.
Yeah, a lot of the attendees actually come from the East Coast.
Okay.
And so, or want to come from the East Coast, and it's difficult for some of them to travel in February because the weather's not always great, after the holidays. So I'm having one in Charlotte, North Carolina, October 20th through the 25th. The 24th and 25th is the conference, and then the 20th through the 23rd are the pre-conference workshops, and that will be in October 2020.
That's
so
excellent.
Hopefully I spaced it out so that I have time to prepare for each one. So I considered that. And then I think fall in the South is a beautiful time to be there.
Yes.
I'm actually from Alabama, so I'm familiar with the South.
Nice. And it's still going to be called the San Diego Pain Summit, even though it's in Charlotte, North Carolina?
It's actually called the SD Pain East.
SD Pain East. Okay, excellent. SD Pain.
And then we'll see how that goes, and there may be a name change or a rebranding, but I want to see how this goes first.
One step at a time. Yeah. No, you've taken on a huge initiative. It's much needed, and I would love to have a few more interviews with you to talk more specific about some of the things people can expect to benefit from attending your conference. So how can people reach you, and how can they find out more about your summit?
They can go to SanDiegoPainSummit.com and then just scroll down, and the 2 different conferences, there's links to each one on that page, and then you can read a little bit about the event and see reviews and everything. All summit conferences since 2015 have been live streamed and recorded.
Excellent.
So you can actually join. Right now I'm running a special till December 15th where you can join the Pain Summit online for only half the price, and the price will be going up in February 10th. So each year as new presentations are added, the price goes up, but it's just a one-time fee, and then you have access to all the presentations, the citations, the bios. And then if the speaker allowed slide sharing, you can download their slides and any handouts if applicable. So that can be found there too. There's also a page, the patient perspective. So all the recordings of the patient panels are placed there for free. And there's also a few resources that I'm continuing to add to for patients, where they can find links to other sites where they can find information about self-management of pain that I really feel like have a lot of valuable information.
That sounds excellent. Thank you so much for sharing all that information, and thanks for taking this on.
Well, thank you for having me on to talk about it.
I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to February. That'll be exciting. Thank you so much.